from the res life, big lessons for the world, dreaming big.
Hello and welcome to the Willie Cheez Education Channel. I'm Delmar and I'm here to bring you another story that brings together personal growth, the wisdom of Navajo culture, and insights from Native histories. Through Willie Cheez's journey, we dive into entrepreneurship, resilience, and life skills that connect tradition with today's world. Let's explore the story of Willie Cheez and the boarding school, a story of struggle and change. Part 1. The Journey Begins. Willie Cheez stood on the edge of the dusty road, a small suitcase in hand, his heart heavy with a mix of fear and uncertainty. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape. Today was the day he would leave his home, his family, and everything he knew to attend boarding school on the reservation. He had heard stories about the school, stories that filled him with dread. The school was run by nuns, and they were known to be strict, unforgiving, and harsh. Willie had seen other children return home after months away, quiet, reserved, and with a sadness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Now it was his turn. As the bus pulled up, Willie took one last look at his family, trying to memorize their faces, their voices, the way they smiled. He didn't know when he would see them again, and that thought made his chest tighten. But there was no turning back now. He had to go. Part 2. The Arrival. The boarding school loomed large as the bus pulled up to its gates. The building was old, its gray stone walls standing stark against the bright blue sky. Willie could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him as he stepped off the bus, joining the other children who had arrived that day. A nun, dressed in a long black habit, approached the group, her face stern and unreadable. "Line up," she ordered, her voice cold. The children obeyed without a word, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and resignation that Willie felt. The nun led them inside, where they were met with the smell of disinfectant and the echo of their footsteps on the cold, hard floors. The first stop was the dormitory, where rows of identical beds were lined up against the walls. The nun handed each child a neatly folded uniform, plain, gray, and devoid of any individuality. As Willie changed into the uniform, he couldn't help but feel a piece of himself slipping away. His clothes, the ones his mother had carefully packed for him, were taken away and locked in a cabinet. He wouldn't see them again until the end of the term. Part 3. The Haircut. The next stop was the barber's chair. Willie had always worn his hair long, like his father and his grandfather before him. It was a symbol of his identity, his connection to his culture. But here, in this place, long hair was not allowed. One by one the children were called to the chair. Willie watched as the barber, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes, roughly cut the boys' hair short, leaving them with nothing but stubble. When it was Willie's turn, he sat down reluctantly, his heart pounding in his chest. The barber didn't say a word as he cut Willie's hair, the strands falling to the floor in clumps. With each snip, Willie felt a part of his identity being stripped away. When it was over, he looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the boy staring back at him. His long, beautiful hair was gone, and in its place was a reminder that here he was not allowed to be himself. Part 4. The Rules. The nuns laid out the rules on the first day, and they were strict. No talking during meals, no running in the halls, no disobedience of any kind. But the rule that struck Willie the hardest was this: no speaking your native language. Willie had grown up speaking Navajo at home. It was the language of his ancestors, the language of his heart. But here it was forbidden. The nuns told them that they were here to learn English, to become civilized, and that their native language was a barrier to that goal. Willie struggled to adjust. English felt foreign on his tongue, and the few times he accidentally slipped into Navajo, he was met with harsh punishment. The nuns would swat the children with a ruler or make them stand in the corner for hours, a reminder that their culture, their identity, was something to be suppressed, not celebrated. Part 5. The Harsh Realities. Life at the boarding school was hard. The days were long, filled with endless chores, lessons, and prayers. The nuns were strict, and any disobedience was met with swift and painful punishment. Willie quickly learned to keep his head down, to do as he was told, and to avoid drawing attention to himself. But even as he tried to adapt, Willie couldn't escape the pain of being away from home, from his family, from everything that made him who he was. The other children were suffering too. They were homesick, lonely, and scared, but they had no choice but to endure. One day, Willie saw his friend, Johnny, break down in tears after receiving a letter from home. The nuns confiscated the letter, saying it was a distraction from his studies. Willie watched as Johnny's spirit seemed to break a little more that day, just as his had when his hair was cut. The emotional toll was heavy, and Willie often wondered how he would get through it. He missed his family, his home, his language, everything that made him feel whole, but he knew he had to survive, to endure, if he was ever to return home. Part 6. A Glimmer of Hope. As the months passed, Willie found small ways to hold on to his identity. He would whisper Navajo words to himself at night, hidden under the covers, or share a quiet conversation in Navajo with his friends when the nuns weren't around. These small acts of defiance were his way of resisting the loss of his culture, of holding on to the person he was before he came to this place. He also found strength in the stories of the older boys, who had been at the school longer and had learned how to navigate its harsh realities. They shared stories of home, of their families, of the way things used to be before the boarding school took them away. These stories were a lifeline, a reminder that there was a world beyond these walls, a world where they could be themselves. Willie also began to notice that not all the nuns were as strict as they seemed. Some of them would offer a kind word, a gentle smile, or a moment of understanding when they thought no one was looking. These small gestures gave Willie hope that despite the harshness of the school, there was still kindness in the world. Part 7. The Lesson for the Future. Years later, when Willie Cheez had long left the boarding school behind, he often thought back to those days. The memories were painful, filled with the sorrow of lost innocence and the struggle to hold on to his identity, but they were also a reminder of the resilience and strength of his people. Willie knew that the boarding school had been a place of suffering for many Native children. It had been designed to strip them of their culture, their language, their sense of self. But despite the harshness of that experience, Willie had survived, and he knew that many others had as well. As he grew older, Willie made it his mission to share the stories of what had happened at the boarding schools. He wanted the younger generation to understand the pain that their elders had endured, but also to see the strength that had come from surviving that pain. He wanted them to know that their language, their culture, and their identity were things to be cherished, not suppressed. Willie often spoke at schools and community gatherings, sharing his story and the stories of others who had been through the boarding school system. He wanted to ensure that the truth was known, that the experiences of those who had suffered would not be forgotten. He also wanted to inspire the younger generation to be proud of who they were, to speak their language, to embrace their culture, and to never let anyone take that away from them. The boarding schools had tried to erase their identity, but they had failed. And now, it was up to the new generation to ensure that their culture thrived. A legacy of resilience. As Willie Cheez looked out at the faces of the young people who came to hear him speak, he felt a deep sense of pride. The world had changed since his days at the boarding school, but the lessons learned there were still important. The younger generation was strong, resilient, and proud of their heritage. They were learning from the past, but they were also looking to the future, determined to build a world where their culture was celebrated, not suppressed. And as Willie shared his story, he knew that the pain of the past had not been in vain. It had taught them all to be stronger, to hold on to who they were, and to never forget the importance of their identity. The boarding schools had tried to break them, but they had only made them stronger. In the end, the true lesson was this: no matter how harsh the world may be, your identity is your strength. Hold on to it, cherish it, and pass it on to the next generation. Because in your identity lies the power to overcome anything.
From the res life, big lessons for the world, dreaming big.